For the love of God, I do not understand why cashiers cannot sit. Story 1. Okay, we have a telescope so inconceivably far out in space it is hard to imagine the distance that still communicates with Earth via space technology. And yet I still cannot get decent cell reception 2 kilometers from the nearest cell tower. Story 2. Some people do not have an inner monologue in their head. How do they have any critical thoughts? Once I read about it, at least once a month I get lost trying to understand it. Story 3. Pedophilia. I just cannot comprehend how someone could be sexually attracted to children. They do not have any of the physical characteristics that I associate with attractiveness. Just no. Story 4. The universe is vast. The speed of light is incredibly fast. It travels approximately 670 million miles per hour. In 1 second, light can travel a distance so large that we measure it in light years. You can circle the Earth 7 times in 1 second, reach the Moon in 0.13 seconds, Mars in 3 seconds, and Jupiter in less than an hour. However, traveling from one end of our galaxy, the Milky Way, to the other would take 100,000 years. The Milky Way itself is just a tiny speck in the universe. It is difficult to grasp how immense it is and how small we are in comparison. Story 5. Vinyl records produce music because the needle, or stylus, runs along the grooves on the record's surface. These grooves are physical representations of sound waves. When the record spins, the needle vibrates as it moves through the grooves, converting these vibrations into electrical signals. These signals are then amplified and sent to speakers, producing sound. Digital formats like MPEG Audio Layer 3 and Free Lossless Audio Codec are files stored on a computer. They encode music digitally, which is played back by software or hardware devices. Vinyl records, on the other hand, produce sound through analog mechanical vibrations. Story 6. Why more people are not fighting to restore tax brackets to a time when a single working parent could raise a family, buy a decent house, own 2 reliable vehicles, enjoy a vacation, put children through college, and have a comfortable retirement to look forward to. The correlation is clear when you consider changes made during the 1980s under a certain president, which led to the decline of top tax brackets and increased economic divide. Story 7. How my daughter went from, "Daddy, can you carry me?" to, "Can you help me paint my living room?" seemingly overnight. Story 8. The idea that human eyesight evolved is intriguing. I am not saying it did not happen that way, but it is so intricate and layered that it seems unlikely it developed simply through a step-by-step process. Story 9. Why do people want to hurt others? I try to be kind in my actions and my words. It seems kindness is seen as weakness, and I cannot understand how anyone could believe this. The ability to hurt someone is not a sign of strength. Story 10. Microchips, computers, programming languages, and so on. You start with some sand. Draw pictures on it that are so tiny you cannot see them without a microscope. Put them all in a box connected together. Communicate with it using ones and zeros. Use it to fly a rocket to another planet. Story 11. I'm so confused, so I don't buy the idea that black holes somehow have an infinitely small singularity dot in the middle, which is the moment they turned into a black hole. They still have the mass necessary for gravity, and there must be a limit to density anyway. You can't tell me that density can be so high that it literally passes the mass through itself. Also, if the speed of light were 1,000,000 times faster, then wouldn't some black holes' event horizons become much smaller or even convert back into stars? Because light would have more speed to escape the gravity. In fact, who said that stars collapse into black hole singularities the moment light can't escape anymore? It just means that gravity became stronger than the informational wave that our biological sensors, like eyes, rely on to detect. If humans relied solely on echolocation, like bats, our measurement of time and theory of relativity would be very different. The speed of light doesn't have any correlation with absolute time itself, in my opinion. It's just the fastest thing we can see. What if black holes are still stars, but in incognito mode? I don't know what I'm talking about. It's 3 a.m. But to answer your question, yes, I can't wrap my head around this can of wormholes. Story 12. Why do we let people suffer without healthcare but go into trillions of dollars in debt to keep growing our military? Story 13. Death. An afterlife. I can't wrap my head around biblical nonsense, but oblivion is hard to understand too. Story 14. How a person could intentionally kill another person, and even worse, an adult intentionally killing a child. Story 15. For the love of God, I do not understand why cashiers cannot sit in the United States. Here in Ireland, cashiers have evolved differently. They only stand if they want to. Story 16. How do tunnels support millions of tons of earth? Why have people who lived much healthier lifestyles than I did died decades before me? Story 17. Computers. How does a computer chip work? How did we take materials from the ground and turn them into something that processes ones and zeros to create something we can use to play games like Minecraft? And how do we even input the ones and zeros? Don't we need a computer to do the typing? Story 18. I am a cashier at work right now. My coworker told me, "It is so we are not sitting all day." It still makes no sense. Story 19. It is crazy to know that humans have destroyed half of Earth's trees, and even after all that destruction, there are still more trees on Earth than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Story 20. Cheating. I don't understand why you would do that. It's not just physical for me for it to be considered cheating. My ex had an online friend who she texted excessively. When I spoke up about how uneasy it made me feel, because not only did they text a lot, she also didn't want to tell him about us being a couple because it wasn't necessary. I was met with, "That's your problem. I can't do anything about that." For me, if you're emotionally invested in someone else and you don't care about your partner's feelings, that's cheating. Story 21. That so many of us have to work much of our waking hours just to survive. With how much technology we have, you would think we could start slowly reducing the standard number of hours for a full-time week, but with the same pay. Story 22. Why does my Subaru allow me to use all sorts of apps on the screen while driving, but I cannot adjust the fade on the stereo when the vehicle is in motion? Don't the designers have kids who fall asleep on long rides? Story 23. Ambition, I suppose. It is not that there are no things I want, but I want them so passively that sometimes I do not achieve them, even if I could. I see people motivated by money and do not understand it. I am motivated by food. I can get through any day if I know that at the end, someone will hand me €1. Story 24. I could never understand the enormity of the male sex drive, how it drives us to live, die, kill, or be killed. It is all-encompassing. When it is really strong at certain times in life, it seems like there is nothing else but that. It is the strongest drug and the most addictive. Story 25. How people think with their emotions rather than logic. How people overvalue their possessions just because they put some sweat equity into those possessions. Story 26. Not as sophisticated as some other answers, but people not returning their shopping trolleys after use. The same applies to their baskets at the self-checkout. Story 27. There is a band named Sleep Token that became very popular, in part due to TikTok. They became so big that they sold out the largest stadium in my city. For starters, they are good, but not that good. Even an artist as popular as Hozier is not selling out venues like that. Also, keep in mind that Sleep Token is a metal band, which makes it even more surprising. Story 28. Why do they keep making products worse with features no one wants? Why does no one make an old-school product for people like me who would pay top dollar? Story 29. Financial topics such as the details of the stock market and the rules for retirement accounts are important. However, whenever I sit through these discussions, I lose focus quickly. I maximize my individual retirement account contribution each year, and that is about it. Story 30. How a small MP3 player, or even a larger device like a boombox or gramophone, can not only record the blueprint for essentially any music but also reproduce it. Story 31. How do people simply not live in objective reality? There is a device called the Hubble Space Telescope. It has shown us things that clearly state the circumstances of our existence and the overall scale of the universe we are in. This knowledge, and truly internalizing it, is essential to building a functional moral and ethical framework. How can you determine the value of life when you do not understand what life means in the context of our universe? By not acknowledging the very basics of what we objectively know about reality and our existence, people are intentionally choosing to live in their own self-created false reality and narrative. It is not about being enlightened or anything like that. It is simply acknowledging what we know to be true and realizing the immense work that comes with the burden of knowing that truth. Story 32. I do not understand why people argue so much all the time. It is not like the other person is going to change their own beliefs when they are both just trying to change each other. Especially when it comes to politics, it is all just about hating each other on both sides. Story 33. Why are they building so many warehouses in every town I go through, only for most of them to sit empty for years? Story 34. The Navier-Stokes equation is an equation that cannot be solved exactly, only approximated. It performs precisely as intended. Story 35. Religion, for me, is obviously created by humans for oppressive purposes and not the individual's best interest. Story 36. In other countries, they can. However, in the United States, it is often an unspoken rule to treat workers poorly. Story 37. Why my ex-wife couldn't see past her own shortcomings and accept the reality that I really love her and have no malicious intentions. Unfortunately, no amount of proving her wrong would help. Her love for me died long ago despite my efforts to make sure she was okay, comfortable, cared for, and loved. Story 38. The meaning of life. I think I will never find the answer, no matter how many people try to tell me they know the answer. No matter how long I search, it is like a question that can never be answered. It all seems so inconsequential. Story 39. Cashiers sit in some stores. Aldi is one. It is also common for them to sit in European stores. As for something I cannot understand, why do people still smoke cigarettes? Story 40. Why do Japanese people see nothing wrong with watching television while driving and letting their children stand on the back seats while the car is moving, as if physics is not a factor in cars? Story 41. How furries seem so adamant about isolating themselves, along with acting like public relations agents whenever anyone speaks up about this topic. I understand the hate they receive, but considering how much they have in common with nerdy people, you would think things would be better. I met someone on Reddit who told me about her friends who were furries. While sometimes they enjoyed her company, other times they acted like they didn't understand why they hung out with her. Just from the content you see occasionally and secondhand, you might think furries would be more sociable, especially if they are older. Many furry-themed short-form videos, comics, and fan art are upbeat, so you would expect furries themselves to reflect that mentality, like many other fandoms do. It's strange to see so much potential left unused, or at least to not have an honest conversation about this. I guess if they want to isolate themselves, that's their choice, but I don't see how things would improve that way. I wouldn't mind having some friends who are furries. It sometimes feels like a catch-22. Story 42. This is a niche topic, but in some competitive online games it is possible to prevent the game from ending, trapping everyone in the match even though the outcome was decided a long time ago. Some people cannot stand losing or, if they are winning, want to rub it in your face, so they will hold a game hostage for 30 minutes to an hour. At what point do those people realize they are also wasting their own time? Two games where this has happened frequently are Dead by Daylight and League of Legends. Most of the time I just quit and do something else, but that is not what I want to do in the game. I have limited free time as an adult, so it is frustrating not to be able to play a casual match without feeling like someone is pouring hot tar down my throat for 30 minutes, only to queue up again hoping for a different experience and getting the same thing. This year, I have mostly played single-player games, and it has been fantastic. Story 43. The concept of infinity is difficult to understand. Every time I try, my brain just short-circuits. For example, even if you subtract 1 billion from infinity, it is still infinity. How can that make sense? Story 44. How vinyl records work. Not only do they work, but somehow someone figured out how to do it. What do you mean you pressed some squiggles into plastic and now it makes music when you run a needle across it? It makes absolutely no sense. Story 45. Flat earthers are basically a subgroup of a larger problem. When people are faced with facts, they often choose to ignore or disregard them. Story 46. Mountain bike prices. I can get a brand new Yamaha XSR 700 touring motorcycle, $8,599, for less than a top-of-the-line Trek Top Fuel 9.9, $9,999. Story 47. We have been to the moon. We have satellites in space. We have cars powered by electricity now. So why have we not developed toilets that are immune to clogging? Story 48. Why do people let politics completely control their daily lives? Their choices, their friends, their enemies, why? If everyone agreed on everything, it would be unnatural and boring. But to literally disown family and friends over politics is unreasonable. Story 49. How can anyone be convinced to kill another person just because a third person gives the order? One example is the dozens of people who fell out of windows in Russia. How can anyone come to believe that it is acceptable to kill another human being unless it is in self-defense? Story 50. For the love of God, I don't understand why cashiers cannot sit. It is a control issue, a way to degrade the employee. If you let them sit while effectively doing their job, the next thing you know they will want a living wage. In America, profit, not just profit, but squeezing the last possible penny out as profit, drives everything. Our leaders literally let people die if it means more profits. Story 51. I can't get my pinks and purples straight. Even though I know pink is pink when I see it and purple is purple, I call them by the wrong name 90% of the time. It's like my brain purposely chooses the wrong label for them. I'm 42 and still have this issue. Story 52. Why do people ask questions on Reddit that can be answered more quickly by a simple Google search? Story 53. Why would someone, such as God, ask us to let him save us from what he will do to us if we do not let him in, yet call it loving instead of manipulation? Story 54. How he can cut millions from Medicare under the guise of trying to reduce the deficit, and then throw a parade for his birthday and the Army's 250th anniversary without being immediately called out for wasteful spending. Story 55. How do pedophiles get into their minds to do inappropriate things with children? I do not understand it. I cannot even imagine that mindset. Story 56. Quantum theory has been tested extensively. However, that does not change the fact that it sounds like a bunch of made-up nonsense. Story 57. Why do we have to work 8 hours to make a decent living and work 6 days a week in the same miserable place day in and day out? Thank God it is Friday. I will do it all over again on Monday. I am a good actor at work, smiling and everything. Story 58. A perfect vacuum. I am not talking about Dysons either. It is like creating a nothing zone. What do you mean there is nothing there? What do you mean nothing is a thing that exists? Story 59. Everyone looks out for themselves. People tend to interpret that as caring only about oneself, but I disagree. You can look after yourself and still not be selfish. People are complex. With every interaction, I feel like I do not want to continue anymore. Story 60. How men do not always put themselves first, even if they are told they are being selfish. Do not let anyone make you feel bad for taking care of your needs first. If they do, you do not need them in your life. Move on with confidence. Story 61. Speakers. I understand how speakers work in theory, but in practice, it blows my mind. How does a paper cone moving back and forth produce all the different frequencies and nuances in music? I understand literally how it works, but there is more to it that is just amazing. Story 62. Why is it so difficult for those in charge of countries to treat each other decently? Not great, not like the most important thing in the world, just decently. Everyone wants to call the shots for the world. Why? Chances are that you won't get what you thought you would. Here is a song. It makes an interesting point. Story 63. How some people are influenced by what celebrities say. I really think if they did not have social media, more people would like celebrities. Okay, I think there would be more tolerance. No, they are just theater kids with fragile egos. Story 64. In 300 years, no one will likely remember anything about us, anything we did or thought, unless it was drastically significant. It will be almost as if we never existed. Story 65. People's politics. They cram a large number of people with different ideals into the same group, and individuals will go along with absolutely insane and foolish ideas to avoid appearing disloyal to their party. Story 66. Why does anyone, anywhere, care how someone else lives? Why is there so much hate against the lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer community? In what way does it have any effect on your life? It does not. Focus on yourself and your own life and live and let live. It does not matter. These are not special rights. They are equal rights. I do not care what your religious text, whichever you choose to follow, tells you to believe. People are real, your God is not. Story 67. How gravity is made in the world. I understand its effects on things, hope satellites stay in orbit, how to arc things when throwing, etc. But why exactly is it that, because the planet is dense, stuff is pulled towards it? Story 68. Why people cannot think for themselves. Humans, as an intelligent species, are very vulnerable to misinformation. Story 69. Women cheating like you give her everything, a comfortable life where her money is hers and your money is for both of you, and she still cheats. The craziest part is cheating with someone who is not doing as well as you are. For those who will say it is about physical intimacy, it is not. You have size and girth, but she still cheats. That is one thing I cannot wrap my head around. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.